Good morning. Pete Wildebohr,
Present.
Pat Bradford,
I am here.
Josie Barnhart,
Here.
Stephanie Craybill,
Here.
Melissa Mason,
Here.
Hugh McManus,
Here.
and Stephanie Walker.
We have all 7 members here. Thank you, members, for being here this morning, very early. Next, we have on our agenda the approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Ms. Craybill.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I am respectfully requesting that we rearrange the order of the meeting just a tad. As we had talked about earlier, I have an appointment that cannot be changed, so I don't want to miss the safety update. I was hoping that we could put the safety update first and perhaps move the superintendent evaluation tool till the end, so that I can be present for as much of the meeting as possible. I've been through the superintendent evaluation a couple times, and I can watch it when we're there, but I don't want to leave for, the safety discussion, if at all possible.
Ms. Craybill makes a motion to, I guess we would say, reshuffle the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Ms. Walker. Discussion. Any discussion?
Any discussion, you guys? No?
I mean, do we need a discussion?
Well, you
I
don't
mean,
have to. I'm just.
No, I'm asking Ms. Craybill, obviously.
No, I just would like to put safety first and then
Yes.
move superintendent last.
I will agree, and that's.
Okay, we have first and second. Hearing no discussion, Ms. Bowie, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Barnhart? No. Ms. Craybill?
Yes.
Ms. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. McManus?
Yes.
Ms. Mason?
Yes.
Ms. Bradford?
No.
And Mr. Wildebohr?
No, so that passes 5-2, so we will switch that to
4-3.
4-3. Okay, that's why I got my little thing I need to keep up with. So we will flip-flop.
Could we just move information to be item number 7?
Sure.
And then just move from there?
Okay, so just move that up ahead of old business.
And then move B to BC, like the legal services B, superintendent C. So that would be the last thing we did was the superintendent evaluation.
And that's the understanding, so we will switch those.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yep. Is there any other discussion on the approval? We have a first and a second on that. All in favor of approval, the amended order of agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed. Carries 7-0. We will now have our our invocation. That will be provided today by, I have it right here, Saltbox Church Pastor Michael Mattis will provide a remote invocation. Please stand.
Hello, this is Michael Mattis, pastor of Saltbox Church, and I'm calling in to offer an open. Pastor of Saltbox Church, and I'm calling in to offer an opening prayer and invocation. So, Father, thank you for the New Hanover County School Board. Thank you for Pete Wildebohr. Thank you for Pat Bradford. Thank you for Josie Barnhart, Stephanie Craybill, Melissa Mason, Hugh McManus, and Stephanie Walker. Father, thanks for their willingness to serve. Thank you for their courage. Thank you for them even looking out for our kids, our teachers, our families here in New Hanover County. And I'm mindful with the string of violent shootings that have happened across the country that there's increased anxiety and fear and uncertainty. And even disagreement. And Lord, I pray for your peace. I pray for your grace. I pray for strength and unity among the school board. I pray you give them wisdom as they make tough decisions and implement tough policies. And Father, I pray that you would protect our families. I pray you'd protect our schools, and I pray you protect our students. In your mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I've asked Board Member Josie Barnhart to lead the pledge. Ms. Barnhart. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, board members. We will continue by, next on our agenda is closed session. I will entertain a motion pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318-11A1, 3, and 6 to consider personnel matters and to maintain the confidentiality of personnel records under NC General Statute 115C-319 through 321, prevent disclosure of student records rendered confidential under Family Education Rights and Privacy Act 20 U.S.C. 1232G, and to consult with the board's attorney to preserve attorney-client privilege, including cases captioned John Doe 1 through 14 versus New Hanover County Board of Education, et al. 19 CVS 2745, and Jane Doe's 1 and 2 versus New Hanover County Board of Education, et al. 20 CVS 1395, and Jane Doe 3 versus New Hanover County Board of Education, et al. 21 CVS 4707, consolidated matters. Do I hear a motion? Thank you, Ms. Walker. Second, Ms. Bradford. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Carries 7-0. We are now in closed session. also important closed session. Our next order of business is the approval of the minutes. We do have some minutes we need to approve. If you look quickly, they are, I'm pulling them up. The April 4th regular meeting, we need that to approved. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved, Ms. Bradford. Second? Second, Ms. Barnhart. Any discussion? All in favor?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am?
Yes, I would like to add some words to that to make the minutes more reflective of the conversation. If one were to read these minutes and not have listened at all, they would have thought that this was a kind of like a done deal, kind of a very vanilla discussion. And I wanted to just add the words that said, 3 board members expressed opposition to this committee, citing policies 3200 and 3210 as being an adequate remedy for book reviews and challenges.
Okay, you've heard Ms. Craybill's motion. Is there a second?
I would like to second that.
We have a second from Ms. Walker. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, I'll discuss that.
Bradford? Where exactly would you like that placed? At the
I
bottom?
was thinking that when it said, Ms. Mason reiterates the purpose of the committee, and then just write the next, either the next little paragraph or the next sentence, just add that right at the end. I just think that the folks that were in opposition of that, it's not reflective of the minutes at all.
Okay. All right, thank you. Ms. Bradford?
I'm going to push back on that. The people who make the minutes are listening to the board meeting, paying attention. And we can't alter the perception of what happened by inserting perfect little words into the minutes that are impressions. So I'm going to vote no on that.
Yeah. Any other discussion? Ms. Barnhart?
I think that was a discussion. I don't think there was a consensus from any of the board to say yes or no, we approve of this. I gave my concern of where I was. I didn't say I was in full approval or disapproval. And so to say that it was 3 versus 4 reflective in the minutes, I don't think is a fair oversight. I mean, we all gave input.
And my only,
Yes, ma'am?
my only thoughts there, Josie, were that I can take out 3 board members expressed. I just feel like that we need to go on the record of, and maybe we hold this off until the next meeting so that we have a chance to go back and look at it. I just think that we could say several members expressed their concern. Maybe we don't have to say opposition, their concern with this committee. So because we did say that, we had a long, lengthy conversation, all of us gave input on that. So I just feel like our minutes need to reflect that there was opposition, there was back and forth, or say it however we want. And Ms. Bowie is an expert at listening and transcribing. So I just feel like we need to have some words that reflect that there was some opposition to the committee.
Okay, any other discussion? Ms. Bowie, if you would, again, the motion is to, I guess, under Section F, District-Wide Book Review Committee. Ms. Crable would like to add the words, there was opposition by several board members to this discussion.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Ms. Bowie, if you would do that via roll call, please. Vote.
Ms. Craybill?
Yes.
Ms. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. McManus?
Yes.
Ms. Mason?
No.
Ms. Bradford?
No.
Mr. Wildebohr?
No.
And Ms. Barnhart?
Yes.
That passes 4-3, so those words will be inserted. Any other discussion? If not, let's vote on passing the minutes as amended. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Carries 7-0. We move on to old business, resolution to request Attorney General Josh Stein to release SBI findings. Ms. Barnhart, you actually brought that to our attention, so if you would speak to that first, please.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt a resolution to support the release of the SBI investigation documents from Attorney Josh Stein's office and/or New Hanover County District Attorney Ben David's office effective immediately.
We have a first, do we have a second?
Yes, sir. Second.
Ms. Walker seconds. Do we have any discussion of that?
Yes.
Ms. Bradford?
I would be in line for that second if I'd had that opportunity. I seek transparency. We want to know what is in the SBI report. I am voting yes on this because it's time for the chips to fall where they may. We need to know what the report says.
Other discussion, I would like to add that I think it's time for closure for these young people, and so I definitely think this is a good idea. Anyone else? Mr. McManus?
Thank you. I'd like to add, which I've said before, that this unfortunate is a dark cloud over this entire school system, and that I feel that everything we do or want to do, policy-wise or statements, that somehow people don't feel the genuineness, that we all want this report. We, for fact, now know that it's been submitted, if I think I'm correct, and that we'd like to find out what's in that report, because we're getting blamed for everything, actually of hiding this report, and there's not a soul on this board that's trying to hide this report. We don't know what's in it, but I think it needs to be shared.
Other discussion? Thank you, Mr. McManus. Is that a hand up, Ms. Walker? Ms.
Yes.
Walker, yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to add much more than what my colleagues have said, but I absolutely agree. I'm into my third year on the board. It's been pretty tough, but I just want to say I know the reporting that we have seen is it's been released probably last summer, and I just think it's time. I think it's time. That's it.
Any other discussion? Ms. Bowie, I'm going to ask
Mr.
a little bit on, yes, ma'am, Ms. Crable.
Before we send it, I would like to make sure that we have it reviewed by members of the board and our legal counsel to make sure that we don't say anything that we should not be saying.
Thank you, ma'am. And Ms. Bowie, this is unusual because I think I know the outcome of this vote, but I would like to do it via roll call so each voice can be heard.
Ms. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. McManus?
Yes.
Ms. Mason?
Absolutely, yes.
Ms. Bradford?
Absolutely.
Mr. Wildebohr?
I like that. Absolutely, yes.
Ms. Barnhart?
Yes.
And Ms. Craybill?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Is there? I'm sorry. Is there additional message? Additional motions?
Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry. I was getting distracted. Mr. Chair, I would, in addition to that,
Walker.
I'm sorry. Thank you, sir. I apologize. In addition to that resolution, I would like to make a motion to direct our legal counsel also to communicate with our Attorney General and any other relevant entity seeking the release of the SBI report.
Second.
We have a motion from Ms. Walker to instruct our legal counsel to move forward. We have a second from Ms. Bradford. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Craybill?
Can you just restate that? I thought that you might have left off some words.
Well, if you can help me with
Okay,
that,
that's why
I would
wanted-
love that.
I was trying to follow along, so
Okay.
could you restate it?
Yes, ma'am. In addition to the resolution, I would like to make a motion to direct our legal counsel to communicate with our Attorney General and any other relevant entity to seek the release of the SBI report.
And I would like to add, and a status of the timeline.
Thank you. I will amend my motion to add in the status of the timeline.
We have a motion. We have an amended motion. We have a second. We have discussion. Is there any other discussion? Again, Ms. Bowie, would you call the roll?
Mr. McManus?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think that's a yes.
Ms. Mason?
Most definitely.
Yes.
Ms. Bradford?
Certainly, yes.
Mr. Wildebohr?
Yes.
Ms. Barnhart?
Yes.
Ms. Craybill?
Yes.
And Ms. Walker?
Yes.
Again, carried 7-0. Thank you, board members. I think this is a very good thing we're doing, and I think it's about time. So I appreciate all your hard work. We will carry on, and I have to update my page. We've changed things around a little bit. Our next update is our safety update. Mr. Anderson, I believe you're heading away. Silverstein. Appreciate you, gentlemen. Thank you. If I could, before we start, I'm going to just make a quick comment. I do appreciate, when we'll say publicly, everyone that was at Ashley High School the other day. As I arrived on Friday, I did see several of you, plus our sheriff's department, so I do want to publicly thank them for being out there. The drug dog, the gun dog, everybody out there, superintendent out there throughout the day. So I was there yesterday also, and things are starting to settle down, but we do need to keep this in the forefront of our thoughts as we move forward and our actions. Sir?
I agree, and I would just add, I know that it's very unfortunate what has occurred over the last couple of weeks, but I would like to publicly thank the staff at Ashley for the job they did. I mean, they did a phenomenal job. They followed procedure, and they deserve that credit. So to get started, I kind of want to pick up where we left off, if that's okay. We were looking at the strategic plan and updating on the safety and security portion of that, and I'm sure we'll continue that into some discussion and conversation afterwards. But today I'd like to really focus on the strategic plan and the student safety, people and places. Specifically, talk tonight or today about campus safety in the physical environment. You remember back in January, we talked about presentation focused on the division of student safety versus school safety, how our safety teams are organized at the school level, in the district level, how communication goes back and forth in both directions. Talked about safety drills and training. But today I want to focus more on the physical safety of our campuses, and that really begins with the True North Consulting Group. They conducted a security and risk vulnerability assessment in 2019. They evaluated every school site and every administrative site or campus. They prioritized recommendations based on scope of work and the location of the site. And we've been implementing improvements to our campuses based on their recommendations in the priority order that they listed them. The county has provided funding for this over the past 3 years in the amount of $1 million each year. We anticipate that we'll receive another $1 million in the 23-24 fiscal year to continue that implementation. But I think it's also important to note that that's not the only avenue for implementing their recommendations. We've incorporated them into new schools, renovations, additions, any opportunity that we get to implement these recommendations, we do so. And we're also pursuing funding through other grant opportunities. We've received grant funding from the North Carolina Center for Safer Schools for the past couple years. So to begin, do you want me to change this? Yes, you can. Is that working? I'll do that. So to begin, this will be a very high-level overview of our safety improvements that we've implemented and that we continue to implement at our schools. Many of the improvements you're aware of, but there may be some that you're not or the public is not. So to begin, let's visit some of our campuses. So safety really begins before you enter the school campus. One of the things that we've noticed is not all school zones are created equally. There's some disparities, and what we are proposing in the next fiscal year is to really do an evaluation of all our school zones. We want to document what's there in terms of signage, pavement markings, flashing caution lights, and pedestrian crosswalks. We want to establish a standard for that we want to achieve at each one of our schools, compare those two, create or identify deficiencies, provide cost estimates, and then bring those back to you in the capital budgeting process. When we're looking at our site, we incorporate CEPTAB design principles. That stands for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. Some of the key points. Uh-oh. Did I do that? No. It's kind of cool. That is not one of the design principles. I'll just tell you. So what we look at with our site design, access control, maintaining vehicular and pedestrian circulation separating our buses and car traffic, establishing key lines of sight from the building interior to the exterior, and really creating an ownership of the property, including fencing, signage, natural landscaping. We want individuals to know when you step on a school site. And I use this as an example because it's Trask Middle School. You think we do this with all new school designs, but that's not so. Whenever we're renovating or looking at a school for any purpose, we'll be considering these design features. One of the things we also talked about is a clear point of entry. And I think this is a great example. This is Trask Middle School before renovations. Very little signage, very little identification of the main entrance. I can remember going there and some other schools for the first time and not really knowing where the main office was. And this is Trask after the renovations. Again, a very clear entrance, visible entrance for visitors, but also very good visibility for school staff. They can see what's going on in the parking lot, and they can see who's coming or leaving their buildings. When visitors to our schools get up to the front doors, we want to make sure we have clear and consistent and very visible signage. We want visitors to know what's expected and what to do. This helps prevent our visitors from being in the wrong place at the wrong time. All of our doors have electronic locks so that the exterior doors are locked at all times. We've installed over 400 electronic locks district-wide, and this is something that I'm sure all of you have seen. Something that you may not have seen is the bottom photo. Wherever we see a situation where doors could be chained together to prevent emergency egress, we've taken corrective action to prevent that. AI phones are located at all of our schools. They provide audio and video communication from the visitor to the front desk. Visitors identify themselves, and they let the school know what the purpose of their visit is. Security vestibules. This was one of the top recommendations from the True North Consulting Group's report. We are implementing this based on best practice from across the nation, school systems across the nation. It provides a 2-point verification for visitor interaction, and they're designed to slow visitor access and contain visitors if they're not needed to go into the main part of the building. So some of the schools that we've implemented this, I'm sure you've seen when you visited, Blair, College Park, Freeman, I won't go down the whole list. But again, this is a combination of funding, some through the 2014 bond and some through the capital funding that the county commissioners have given us over the past couple years. This is I thought was a really good example, a great solution. The existing entrance was located to the right of that sign. That remains. We created a new entrance for during the school day visitors. It's clearly marked, clearly identified. The AI phone is there so they can communicate with staff. If you're a visitor, if you're buzzed into the security vestibule, this is what you can expect. Here you've got good visibility inside and out, and again, and audio and video communication with staff. They may buzz you in from this point if you need to get into the building. If you're there to pick something up, they may just bring that to you. So some upcoming schools that right now we're looking at starting construction at Gregory, Howe, and Spencer this summer with security vestibules. Those have all been designed and bid at this point, so we're ready to go. And in the queue for the following year, we'll start design for New Hanover, Rolling Grice, Laney, Ashley, and Hoggard. So other things that you've seen and may or may not know that have been implemented over the last several years. Visitor check-in systems at all of our schools, security cameras at all of the schools, interior locks and shades on classroom doors, communication notification system. We've installed new and upgraded existing, intrusion detection, fire alarm, emergency shutoffs, and interior design for visibility. We also want to give thanks to our Sheriff's Department. We now have a dedicated SRO at our traditional elementary, middle, and high schools. I know when Mr. Silverstein has said when he's at conferences and he talks about the partnership that we have with our Sheriff's Department and the fact that we've got SROs in our schools, that is certainly not the case at most school systems across the state. So thank you to the Sheriff's Department for that. I think it's a huge benefit to our school system. We're providing training and promoting awareness, written procedures, recommending and implementing recommended strategies from the True North report. However, I always say this at the end as, what's the most important part of all of this? And it's each one of us. Each and every one of us. No one knows our schools better than our teachers and our staff. If it doesn't look right, say something. And really, I said teachers and staff, but I want to go back. It's students, teachers, staff, families, those people that are in our schools or visiting our schools on a daily basis. I can't promote just situational awareness enough. And if you see something, say something. School safety is as much about awareness as it is with locks and alarms, and only working together with these physical improvements that we've put in place can we really make a difference. So, this time, we will entertain questions.
Thank you for that. And I just want to say the one thing that I'm looking at, and I have told parents, me knowing the behind the scenes stuff, it makes me feel more at ease. However, with that comes the question and feedback, especially after the events at one of our high schools, has been, what can we do? How can we be involved? And so that's one of the things that the presentation did not really highlight on. And so I'd like for us to take a moment to talk to about how we are going to be intentionally involving our communities and our families, because this does not need to continue to happen, these events that have happened in the past. And so if you can speak to that and some ideas that we can engage our community so that we can continue to have safe schools for our students.
So volunteering, there's watchdog programs. Are there other programs that senior staff can think of that specific volunteer opportunities for community members and families like Watchdog?
So Hanover does a Unity project where they bring their folks in to kind of rally around the entire campus.
Right.
Yeah, Ms. Grable had a comment too.
Yeah, I was going to say that Strength for Unity, because I volunteer myself in that program.
Ms. Mason?
I'm glad you brought up the watchdog. Is that something that would be implemented on a school-by-school basis, or is that something that district-wide we could
It's my understanding that's school by school, isn't it? Correct.
Yeah, so I guess you could talk to your principal about that. Bradford?
I don't have a question. I'd like to make a motion that we instruct the superintendent to call a principal-led roundtable safety public input meeting with parents from Ashley relatively soon, schedule it relatively soon.
I'd second that.
Motion, we have a second. Is there a discussion on that motion, and then we'll go back to the questions? Any discussion on that? Ms. Walker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will say that I think when we look back at what happened with Hanover, Ms. Grable to discuss how helpful it was to have a discussion like this with the community, the school community, and have principals and people involved on the ground, including counselors. So, I mean, if we can do something similar to that, I would be supportive of this motion.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on that because the Ms. Varnum and her department put that together, and the crisis management team was there, and it was very helpful to have additional resources, not just talking about physical safety, but talking about mental, issues. And I know that one thing that I have heard about these kind of incidents, like when there are cyberbullying incidents or kids are afraid or nervous to come to school, how does that track in their attendance? Do they get an excused absence because they're home and afraid? So that might, bring up more, ancillary discussions that we hadn't really, unintended consequence. We don't want to penalize a kid and force them to come to school and have a nervous breakdown, but we also have an attendance policy that we have to, work towards.
Anyone else?
I think it's the right thing to do, to give the parents a chance to meet. I just think it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, sir. We have a motion, we have a second. Hearing no additional discussion, all in favor of holding a roundtable discussion as soon as possible at Ashley High School, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries 7-0. Let's go back to our questions. Do we have any additional questions for these two fine gentlemen? Ms. Barnhart?
I do. Can you just speak to the outward deterrent measures that we are actively doing and things that we are considering that you would have to bring forth to the board? That's on everybody's mind right now. And so I just would like for you to take a moment to share with our community what we're doing at our schools and some ways that maybe we can continue to look into.
You want to talk about what's been going on immediately over the last couple of days?
So what's been happening since the last 2 weeks? Sheriff's Department has stepped up their input and their interest in our schools. They have had additional deputies at our schools. They have had canines in our schools. They've pulled canines from other details, had them work in our schools. I can tell you that no less than 15 phone calls a day between me and someone in law enforcement about just our high schools right now, let alone the regular phone calls I get constantly. Mr. Anderson spoke about it before. We can't say enough about the Sheriff's Office and what they do. I am in constant communication. Even this morning, there's been 5 phone calls back and forth with them about things that are happening behind the scenes that fortunately no one even hears about, because they do it, we take care of it, and it's done and never goes any further. So they have stepped up so much on what they've done. We've increased our support to Ashley High School. Myself and Mr. Anderson were there yesterday listening to staff and hearing their concerns and getting feedback and input from them on what they want to see. We're looking into what changes can be done, not just at Ashley, but at any of our high schools, to make all of our high schools safer from any incidents like we've had in the last 2 weeks. So there are things that we're looking into. I've talked to contacts I have about what schools are doing in different parts of the country to deal with that. They're sending me feedback. When I have that feedback, I'll be presenting it to Mr. Anderson, and we'll hopefully have a presentation to you of what we might want to implement. We're looking at an organization that is nationwide that provides response protocols and training for staff and students for incidents like we've been experiencing throughout the entire year. So we're looking to partner with that organization and see exactly what that would look like and how it could help New Hanover County Schools. So there are things that we are putting in place and have had in place prior to 2 weeks ago, and the wheels have just been turning, and we are working to make all that happen so we can just continue to make our schools safer. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
I mean, a little bit. You touched on the dogs, you touched on the police presence, and those are the two active things that we're able to do. And I'll just reiterate, I know with some other safety measures, and I know metal detectors get thrown out, so I'll talk about that, or wanding, things like that, come with a cost. So whenever you are investigating and figuring out what are good practices, let us know the costs associated with it, because then it's our job to go to the county commissioners or state level to insist on funding for our students and staff.
And that's one of the things I'm getting information on too, and I'm researching with other schools and how they do it and how they handle it, because it's a lot more than just putting metal detectors at front doors. It encompasses a whole lot more than that. So we don't want to just come to you with, hey, here's a price for metal detectors. We want to come with, this is what has to happen here, but this is what's happening globally in our schools. And so it's not just one unit or units at the front doors.
Ms. Walker?
Could I add to
go ahead.
that a minute? Because Mr. Silverstein mentioned meeting with the Ashley staff yesterday, and that was, of course, came up. And I think it's important that we develop a plan that we can implement at the district level. You know, it's not a knee-jerk reaction to a specific incident at a specific school, but it's something that we come to you and recommend we implement at the district level. And it's something that's sustainable. It's not something that we're going to, this is what we want you to do for the next 3 months. I mean, this needs to be something permanent, the direction of our school system. A lot of really good comments came out of the meeting the other day and yesterday, and I recommended that they use their leadership team to funnel information through department chairs up to their leadership, and then compile them and give those to me, because I really do want to hear what their concerns are. And they may, I'm sure, will have some very good recommendations and ideas. So that's another way we're kind of gathering information.
Ms. Walker?
So I want to say thank you for that. And I think this is a good avenue to communicate. I think the biggest thing that sticks out for me is communication with parents, because I know we get calls and we get a ton of emails, and I've been struggling, honestly, how to answer. And I think having this, town hall meeting with parents where we can at least directly talk to them, communicate with them, anything we can do to keep letting them know what we are doing actively, what we can say, is very, very important. And I like your idea about having a plan, because it's clear that we need to do something.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. Ms. Graybill?
And yeah, I would encourage us too that the student engagement summit that it took place last week, several of their breakout sessions talked about school violence and school safety and mental health as it reflects to their time at school. And there were a number of adult leaders there, including, Mr. Madden, who led one of the conferences or little breakout rooms. So I think it would be incumbent to, check with those adult leaders that were there, because the students had some really interesting things to say about why they felt safe, why they didn't feel safe, things that, teachers or staff could do to help them, on a personal level. So that might be another, data gathering place.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Graybill. Mr. McManus?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. I would like for it to be considered that during exams, we know that individual exams take hours, particularly with extended time, understandably, and also monitoring each classroom. And so that's a rationale for the principals, which I understood, not having, putting kids in the gym and or cafeteria. In the interest of safety and what's been going on, and again, to try to respond in some positive manner at this point in time, I'd like to know how we can legally, for those kids who don't have exams, they can take their work home when they finish. They don't have to sit all day, which is a large crowd, which might be inviting at this point. And I hate to say that, but just in the interest of safety. So that's something I'd like for us to discuss.
Dr. Fass, would you like to discuss that?
So I would, the only way that we can do I call it e-learning, but it's remote learning is through weather, and we wouldn't be able to classify that as weather. If students are not in school, by law, we have to say it's either lawful or an unlawful absence. And as long as we are in school, we can't tell kids not to come to school. That would be, and then give them a lawful absence. So I don't know how to get around that. We shared at the end of last semester what high schools were doing for exams for those who weren't taking EOCs. Of course, like this week, some are taking AP exams. Some will be taking teacher-made exams, but there's a plan. And I'll just be honest, they were never instructed to follow the law. And so now that I'm having them follow the law, you're putting me in a hard position. And I know that we have had kids who didn't come to school, and we didn't use an unlawful absence. And I can't put my license on the line and say that. And so I don't know how to tell you how to break the law, because I'm not going to tell you how to break the law. And because you won't have to go to court, I'll have to go to court. And so what happens is there's federal dollars that are tied up into this. And I'm not going before a federal court judge to say anything other than I followed the law. So that's the hard rule that I have to follow. But you can be sanctioned with your federal dollars. You can be required to pay back state dollars. And I'm not going to put the district in that lens. And I get it. I understand people want to say that, if we move them here, this is what could happen. But I also sat in a meeting with Judge Corkening, who said, that most of the incidents that happened in his courtroom during the pandemic is because kids had unstructured learning. And so if we provide unstructured learning, then we're setting kids back up. So I understand this is a rough part, and we've gotten through some rough things. And I've been at the helm of a lot of the rough things that have been thrown on me. And all I know is there is I think it's one of the authors have said, when you're going through blank, keep going. Because we can't stop and say that we're going to break the law, and then we tell others who have broken the law that they were wrong for breaking the law. I just can't say, it's like we're either going to be right or we're going to be right. And so that's all I can say to that one.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Mason.
I think that the concern that's come up from students that I've received, and I'm sure several of our other board members have received, is they're taking the test and then they have to stay. When I was in school, so long ago, probably more recent than some people, I'm sorry. But when I was in school, we went for the test and then we were sent home. Is that still the policy? Is there a certain amount of hours that we have to have our kids in the building for it to count? And if so, are they then able to be released once they're done with their exams?
So when I was in school, probably around that same time in a different county, we did some of the same things. And they were probably counting days. And so that would meant that if you went like 11:30 would consider half day. Now we do hours. And because we have to have hours, those hours count. And so we count those, I forget what the number, if I'm 5.5, 6 hours, I'm just making that up, but every hour in that seat actually counts. So that's what was taking place then. If we were not counting hours and we were counting days, then you would it would look different. However, there's also opportunities where they're exploring, because what has happened in school districts where I have led and where I've been at the senior table is where you have first, second, third, and fourth. And so let's say on Monday, you have first period. And you take, if you're in an exam, you're doing exams first period. The second part of the day, or let's say first and second, and if you're doing an exam, whatever class you're not in, or I think it's like first and fourth, I'm speaking really fast, first and fourth, if you're not taking an exam, you're prepping for them to take the exam. So there's still instruction going on for those first and those second part of the day. And somehow we've gotten away from that, and we have to re-examine why, and I get it. The board should not have to make a decision or have to invest time on what's best for students. That's what we're supposed to do. And somehow it got away from you. I mean, it got away from people who are like, okay, we take exam one, and if you don't have an exam, don't come to school because I don't have room to, I don't have anyone to teach you. Well, that's actually not true. And we have to design a plan, and they've been working on it, that will do just that. And I get it, some kids are like, well, I don't have any EOCs. You don't have any EOCs, but you still have responsibilities to be in school because it's still technically supposed to be an educational day. And so there are things that are actually going on behind the scenes. And I actually told Dr. Faison that she could go do something else today. She's working, but she would do something else. But she talked about what they're doing, what principals are doing for exam week. Because you also have to remember, so kindergarten, first, second grade, they're not testing either. What do we do with them? We keep them in school. I mean, literally.
Bradford?
Okay, just to be clear, we are designing a plan to have instructional time before, after, during exams so that the students aren't just congregated somewhere sitting doing nothing?
Absolutely.
That's responsive to parents' requests, so that's, I mean, it's a hard
But it
place to
is.
say, yeah, your kid has to do it that way,
Right.
especially when your generation may or may not have had to do it that way. So, thank you.
I mean, you're talking to a parent. So last year, my daughter was a senior and was told to do something else. Said, you can't do that. And, we had to have a conversation. So it was hard for me as a superintendent to hold her accountable, and then others were being told something different.
Has to be the superintendent's daughter.
Mr. Chairman, so what I gather from what you're saying, Dr. Frost, is you're saying under previous leadership, there was a lack of accountability for not having to have an attendance law. And the board, and I think this happened before we came on, changed to have an attendance policy because we understand that kids need to be in school, and the more likely that kids are in school, the more likely they're going to be successful. And so what you're saying is there's a learning curve because people are now saying, this is what the accountability piece looks like. The other thing, and I just wanted to say this to Mr. McManus openly, the policy committee had discussed the idea in attendance because there is a clause to say that the board could create exceptions essentially to the rule. And then we started saying, well, what would that look like? Who would we pick and choose to that exception? And it became into this really messy endeavor because even with good intention, a lot of things could fall through. So then the other avenue that we kind of discussed at last meeting was potentially to open a dialogue on a state level to allow for some remote flexibility that we could utilize. We could work with our central office to say, maybe during exams, we would utilize a remote instruction half day or something like that. But that's not an option right now. So that was an idea brought in policy to bring up at our legislative to potentially consider for part of the legislative agenda process.
Welcome, Ms. Graybill.
So I'm just going to round this back to the safety discussion because these
Right, that's what
lovely
I was gonna
gentlemen are
say.
standing
We
there
need to get back to
waiting.
safety.
I think the feedback we got from the last time was that kids were being put into a certain space and oftentimes couldn't go to the bathroom or couldn't be checked out by parents and things like that. So I think the concern was that if we're keeping them there for instructional time, there should be a place where they're getting instruction. And so if we're having plans that are going to address that, I think that is key to this conversation. And I know Dr. Faust talked about it being kind of a school site. It's their responsibility to do that. And so hopefully that is being addressed, because if not, we're going to hear it again. Just letting you know.
Do we have any question for these two gentlemen? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Will you explain why during, thank you, will you explain why during the lockdowns that students aren't allowed to go to the bathroom? There's a lot of misconception about that out there, and we just need to clear it up.
Absolutely. So we weren't in a lockdown last week. We were in a shelter in place.
Yes.
So there's a distinct difference between shelter in place and lockdown, as I'm sure all of you are aware. In a lockdown, you cannot leave your classroom. You cannot move from your classroom. You have to be as quiet as possible in your classroom. Draw no attention to that classroom. We're in a lockdown because there's a potential threat somewhere in or around our actual building. And if that threat is somewhere in the hallways, and we allow a student to go into the hallway to use the restroom, we're exposing them potentially to a threat. Our job is to keep them as far from the threat as possible. So that's the bottom line answer. We don't want to expose them to any potential threat that we don't know what's in that hallways. In a lockdown, there should be nobody in any of our hallways except law enforcement. Not administration, not staff, not students, nobody except law enforcement. They're the only ones that should be in the hallway at that point, making our schools safe. That's the best way. And in shelter in place is what we were in last week. Students, if need be, can move throughout the facility, but they're supposed to be escorted by someone within the school, admin, teacher, somebody. So if they are going to the restroom, we're sure that they're actually going from here to there and back to there, not going to look outside what's happening outside. Kids are curious. So we want to make sure that if they do go to the restroom, they can, but escorted, knowing where they're going. At no point should they be walking freely through the schools and possibly expose themselves to what might be outside.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it very much. We'll move on. I do see that I kind of jumped around. I do apologize to the board for that. We were going to skip the resolution because we've already done that. So we'll move on to B, which is legal services. We have two things to discuss under legal services. One is the terms for the Vogel law firm, and the other is the official ending of the contract with Tharrington Smith. So why don't we take the Tharrington Smith discussion first, and then we can move to the Vogel's discussion second.
I'll be glad to answer any questions you have.
I'll thank you, Ms. Sutton. So I guess yes, ma'am, Ms.
So
Craybill?
it is my understanding that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we have a contract with Tharrington Smith through June the 30th, so we don't have to do anything, right? They will continue to be our legal counsel, our general counsel, unless we tell them otherwise. Is that correct?
That's correct. I still, and I think I mentioned this at a previous board meeting, I just need to submit the letter saying that we're not going to continue services within the 30 days as we discussed previously.
You've already, I'm sorry.
I have not done
You have
that.
not.
That's what I would need to do,
Right.
prior to the 30 days so that we can give the notice. But that
But-
hasn't been done yet.
Mr. McManus?
Is there a process, I'm pleading fifth, is there a process where the attorneys at some point share kind of an update? We have so much going on, someone to step in that doesn't have an accurate background of where we are.
So we could have them provide an update if you'd like.
Is that something that's planned?
Normally, and I think maybe this was discussed briefly in some of the presentations, that normally when you're switching attorney firms, the attorneys would get together and talk through the cases that were outstanding. And then we would need to make a determination as far as, or the cases with Tharrington and Smith going to stay with them, or the current case is going to transition over to the new firm. And so I haven't gotten that far along yet to be able to bring information back to the board on that.
And board members, this is Jason. I'm
Yes,
happy
sir.
to weigh in on that. Just
Yes, thank
generally, when boards are switching law firms, we work very closely with administration and typically the board chair and the new legal counsel to ensure that there's continuity of services, right? So that's, I've already started and we've already started cataloging any active litigation matters or complaints or other, like if it's a grievance or that type of an issue, and identifying those that will end or that we think will resolve by June 30 and those that might continue. Part of what we do is talk with new legal counsel about those matters that might continue, past June 30, so that they're up to speed and ready to hit the ground running. In some districts, there's a transition period where the school system might want their current or old attorneys to continue on for a short period of time on a consultation basis, or for specific, discrete matters, or for specialty matters. That's all part of the transition process. But just again, generally speaking, it's a very open discussion with your new counsel to make sure, again, that there's continuity of services. Our number one goal is the district, and your new lawyer's number one goal is the district, and ensuring that anything moves forward, there's clarity on who's handling what. And those will be ongoing conversations, typically with leadership and the new attorneys.
Bradford?
I am going to make a motion that we go ahead and give notice to our current law firm, the 30-day notice, and move forward with the transition. It can be with consulting basis in the future on cases. I'd also want to consider consulting basis on the new firm so that there's continuity at all layers as we go forward. If something arises that needs legal attention or litigation or whatever in that 30-day period.
And board members, if you'll indulge me, I know I'm not a disinterested party here, but I did want to clarify that the board's current contract with Darrington Smith is set up so that it ends June 30, and it doesn't require any action by anyone for it to end on that date. So our contract does not require 30 days notice if the board's desire is for it to end on June 30. I just wanted to clarify that point. You don't have to do anything.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jay.
Yeah, that was my question.
And just another quick point, our contracts also are not exclusive. So to the point of, when to start with the new firm, that's obviously very much completely at your discretion. But that could certainly start earlier too, in the event that there are new matters that come in between now and June 30 that you would want to refer to the new firm, from the get-go. That's certainly, all of course within your discretion. If you were to issue a 30-day notice now, that would mean your contract with Darrington Smith ends, June 10th, right, or June 9th. But if you, as a board would like the contract to essentially run its course and end on June 30, you don't have to do anything.
With that in mind, Ms. Bradford, would you like to rescind your motion?
Maybe restate. Maybe restate. Give me a minute.
Okay. Other discussion? Mr. Crable?
I'd like to amend that motion, even though it was way too long. It really wasn't even a motion. But I would like to make a motion that we reconsider our decision to select Vogel as our attorneys, because I don't feel that they are qualified, even with the partners that they've brought in. They have limited education law experience. They're not qualified to handle the diversity and complexity of our system and the needs of our staff who are trying to meet the needs of our student body. I also have concerns that he was less than forthcoming with us in stating that their contract was being reconsidered with the Cabarrus County Board of Education, if you listen to their meetings and you look at their minutes, they were clearly told that their
Mr.
contract
Chairman,
was
I
not being...
object to the consideration of this motion. I'm allowed to interrupt for that.
Okay.
And it does not require a second, it does not require debate, it does not
The motion I made,
require
Ms.
amendment.
Bradford, was to rescind our vote. And I will
I'm
retract
objecting to
all the rest of the stuff I said.
consideration of that.
I reject your rejection.
Reject your rejection. Okay, so I will move faster. We do not need a second on that. So you are objecting to her consideration. We need to vote on that. Am I correct, Mr. Weber?
That's correct. So Ms. Craybill has made, I believe, a motion to rescind. And under Robert's rules, Ms. Bradford has made a motion to avoid that main motion, which is an objection. No second, no debate. It requires two-thirds against consideration.
All right, so the motion, we have in front of us, and Ms. Bradford's, she's objecting to the consideration of the question, which was Ms. Craybill's question. We need to take a vote on that at this point. Two-thirds vote needs to be forthcoming to object to that consideration.
Mr. Chair, may I have clarification,
Yes,
please,
ma'am.
on what we're voting on exactly?
We are voting again. Ms. Bradford is trying to remove Ms. Craybill's reconsideration of the discussion of, or the motion that we had to accept the Vogel.
So we're voting on her objection.
Her objection. So basically,
Okay.
not to go further into transparency, but if we vote with that, then we would remove Ms. Craybill's motion. It would come off the table. Correct, Mr. Weber?
That's correct. That's
Thanks,
the
sir.
result.
All right. And there is no debate on this, so Ms. Clarice, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Walker?
I think voting
We're voting on her motion to remove
reject.
her motion.
no.
Mr. McManus?
Wait a minute, I'm confused.
I'm trying to confuse you. But
We're voting on your motion to rescind.
no?
No, we're voting on Ms. Bradford's motion to reject my motion, thereby silencing us.
So Walker said no. Okay, sorry, keeping up with it. McMahon said no?
Ms. Mason?
Yes.
Ms. Bradford?
Yes.
Ms. Barnhart? Ms. Crable?
No.
Mr. Wildebohr?
Yes, but though that passes, that is defeated because it does need a two-thirds vote. So we're back
That's
to
right.
Ms. Crable's
So-
motion. Sir?
No, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I would just make sure, I'm trying to do this juggling. Back to your motion, ma'am. Would you like to
My
speak?
motion is to reconsider our decision to go with Vogel Law Firm.
I'll
Okay.
second.
And we had a second to Ms. Walker. Let me get my thing going here again, sorry. All right, Walker seconds. Crable makes the motion. Ms. Crable, we will discuss it. Would you like to speak to your motion? I think you already did, but
Yeah,
I'll give you an
so
opportunity.
I'll just reiterate that I believe that Mr. Vogel and his law firm, according to Rule Number 7 of the North Carolina Bar Association, a lawyer shall not make a false and misleading communication about the lawyer or the lawyer's services. A communication is false or misleading if it contains material misrepresentation of fact or law or omits a fact necessary to make the statement considered as a whole, not material misleading. So on two different occasions, in his interview and in his presentation on April the 24th, he was still running, he was still in the running for the Cabarrus County School Board General Counsel, when in fact he was not. At the December 12th meeting, the board voted to consider alternative legal counsel other than Vogel and Hartzell and White. And I sent those minutes to the board last night so they could look at them for themselves. Then at the January 9th meeting, the board voted to terminate the contract with Mr. Vogel and Hartzell and White and initiate the 120-day termination clause. I also included those minutes for you to look at. So that action set their last day of service to be today, May the 9th, and Mr. Vogel and his new partners knew this when they presented to us. In addition, Mr. Vogel presents himself as an education lawyer, but when you look at all of his LinkedIn pages and his website, it appears that most of his work has been in defending families and students against school boards and not working with school boards. And in fact, on his website, it says that he's now not taking school families and employee clients anymore. So that speaks to that. Mr. White, who is with him right now, his specialty is handling traffic violations, DWIs, misdemeanors. And Mr. White is the one that we see at all the meetings doing all the talking. It's not Mr. Vogel. So he does not name his employees on his website, and there is no reference to this limited liability partnership with Sink Law and Terry Wallace Law. So I think that in and of itself is reason for us to reconsider him, that he was not even selected to be a finalist to present to the Cabarrus County Board. And he argued last night that he should be able to give a presentation last night, which is completely, out of bounds. So I'm just concerned that, and then 2 times they made a motion to stay with him in the interim, and the board wouldn't even second it. So they obviously don't want him for some reason, and I don't feel like we want him either.
Thank you, Ms. Grable. Does someone from the other side speak? Ms. Bradford?
I am so aghast that these accusations would be made against a reputable law firm. I watched the entirety of that meeting last night, including the 2-hour closed session period, the next closed session period. That is a divided board. But the one thing that differentiates this divided board with that is there were no personal attacks against any of the attorneys, either present or future. But this board continues to allow personal attacks against ourselves and now a law firm, and I just object strenuously to that. This is sour grapes, and we need to put a stop to these personal attacks. I watched the meeting. A member of the public in the quality audience got up and said, and I'm going to paraphrase because it was late, she said that there had been a secret meeting among 3 board members and at least 8 to 10 staff behind closed doors. They were all required by the superintendent to sign a confidentiality agreement to say that they would not tell what happened in those secret meetings. The law firms were not privileged to what happened in there, so they couldn't advise on it. The meeting was very orderly, but very divided. They could not, they had 4 votes, but they never digressed into calling names. They all said that all of the law firms that had been considered were qualified. They were just trying to pick the one that they thought best suited their needs, which is what we're supposed to be doing, and not calling names and not using words like disbarred and calling into question their credentials. It is, again, I repeat, ludicrous. And I just want to put a stop to this kind of behavior. I believe that our former chairperson is completely out of order in the things that she's doing in this board, and she's running amok, and I personally am quite tired of it.
Ms. Walker?
I was part of the committee that was totally disregarded, which you were a part of as well. I took it in good faith in that committee. And when the attorneys presented, I went into it with good faith. I asked a simple question, and I was not told the truth. That bothers me immensely. I watched the meeting last night too, and I can tell you one thing they were very united on was that they did not want to continue services with the Vogel Law Firm. They were not split on that. So I'm not calling people names. I didn't tell them to not tell me the truth. I just asked a simple question. So when I was part of the committee, I didn't know who they were. I had no idea who they were. You may have known who they were, but I didn't. And so when I was scoring them, it was based on qualifications only. That's all I did. And if the committee's worth anything, which was not a secret committee, I felt Cabarrus was a lot more thorough than we were. I felt like maybe we should adopt some of those next time. But I just feel like on paper, they were not qualified. And I still stand by my feeling on that. Well, it's not even a feeling. It's a fact. Look at my scoring sheet. Everyone can see it. The whole public can see the scoring sheet. So it was only based on, not my preference. And so I will just say again, if the firm is going to get up in front of the public and not be completely honest with what is being asked of them, that is a huge red flag, and it could potentially be very detrimental to this district going forward, especially in the realms that we absolutely need them for. We are, we're not as big as Cabarrus, but we certainly have a lot going on, and we're going to continuously need people that can be qualified to give us advice, proper advice. So I will just leave that there.
Anyone else? Mr. McManus?
At some point, we got to agree to disagree and move on. We'll take the vote. I will not vote for Vogel, not because I dislike Vogel, because I know the intensity and the background and the depth and the scope and the width of so much that's going on in this county. I totally fear that the size of, I don't know him, I don't know, I just fear. So we will find out in the next 6 months, particularly with our central office staff who deals with the attorneys every day. But I'm going to vote with you, but we need to stop it because we're just beating each other up and we don't need to keep doing that.
Okay.
We'll see what happens.
Ms. Barnhart?
Mr. Wildeboer, and I have a question for Ms. Sutton, just for clarity for me. The biggest concern, and I said this last week, was potentially that they would not be able to maintain the workload. And so as far as the contracts go, my understanding is Tharrington Smith is over as of June 30th, and there's going to be a process, like Mr. McManus said, I know your name, that of the takeover of just acquiring cases. So I would assume, and please tell me if I'm wrong in this assumption, any new cases that happen as of today moving forward, that would be shared with the new law firm. But then the other thing, and I believe Jason had mentioned it, that if there was discretionary matters or specialty matters or consulting, that we as an entity would be able to say we would like that extra support in the event that we're not getting what we need. Am I wrong in that
Yes,
assumption?
we can still consult with Tharrington and Smith like we do other attorneys now.
Okay, so that's already an option on the table now. So even though Tharrington Smith has, 192 attorneys, we still have the option to consult with other people. So I just want to clarify that, because what it sounds like where the discourse is happening, and I could be wrong with my interpretation, it sounds like the discourse is happening is that there are people that say, nope, we're not going to get what we need and we're just going to fall flat on our face. But we have this outlet that we are allowed to, even if we utilize Vogel, which is what the board adopted last Tuesday to do, that we have the option for consulting matters if necessary. So I just want to clarify that we do have that option. Okay, thank you.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
Do we also have the option of consulting with Vogel during that period of time?
So we can certainly do that. That's the will of the board. Originally, my thought was we would work through this contract that we're in now with Tharrington and Smith. That would end June 30th, July 1. Those Vogel services would start. We would have a contract in place that would start July 1. So that was my thought process, but it's
just because of budgetary and what's allocated, we don't have an allocation for a new line item for, and you help me with, because we'll have to run, if I'm taking the question correctly, that means that we would have both law firms working at the same time.
Yeah, but
in addition to
supposedly not on the same issues though, but I guess maybe if the board wants them to be working together, then that would be a valid concern, is if we're having to pay both of them to be working on the same cases so they're both up to date. That would be a budget concern.
My understanding would be that the law firms would get together and then they would pass over the information. When I say pass over, give over the firm, then it's gone to them. But if we hire the new firm before the 30 days, then we are paying both attorneys work on the same case.
And I want to just address truthfulness, because I watched that whole meeting last night, and right up till the end, the Vogel Law Firm and the White Law Firm both were asking to still be considered and encouraging in the 3-4 vote that they be considered. So I want to go on record, party of one, if I am, that I do not believe that that law firm was distruthful, untruthful. I don't believe they lied or any of those other things, and I just want that to be stated for the record.
Ms. Walker?
Thank you. I think the biggest concern here, and I appreciate Ms. Barnhart asking the questions, is our staff needs support, and they need proper support, and I don't want to leave them without that support. I'm obviously not convinced that Vogel can give them that support, and I feel like if we haven't really talked out any of the agreements or arrangements or anything yet. That never got decided, so, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I really, really, really am concerned that our staff gets the support they
And
need.
that's actually what this discussion was supposed to be, but it is now transformed, and that's fine. So we have a motion to reconsider the Vogel law firm. We have a motion, we have a second, we've had discussion. So again, this motion is to reconsider the Vogel law firm as our attorney. Would you please?
Ms. Crable?
Yes.
Ms. Barnhart?
No.
Ms. Bradford?
No.
Ms. Mason?
No.
Mr. McManus?
Yes.
Ms. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Wildebohr?
No. That motion needed a majority and fails 4-3.
Mr. Wildebohr?
Yes, ma'am. Ms.
I'd
Grable.
like to make a motion that we enter into a contract with Vogel on a month-to-month basis, and not in a pay-as-you-go fashion.
Motion.
We have a motion by Ms. Craybill to go, that was very quick, by the way. Pay as you go and month to month.
I'll second.
A month. We have a second from Ms. Walker. So we have a motion. Would you like to discuss that, please, Ms. Craybill?
Yes. Their retainer that they told us would be $12,000 a month. And that equates to $144,000 at a minimum. And that is just for coming to our board meetings. That does not include all the other stuff that we need them for. They, if we did Board of Education plus day-to-day, then it's $22,500, which adds up to $270,000 at a minimum. And we have not budgeted for that. And our costs that we already do, that we have been running about, $250,000. So they're already way more expensive than what we had intended. So that's why I think that we should not do a retainer. We should do is pay as you go. The second thing is month to month. I think that they need a trial period to see what they can handle for us, because we have a lot of complex and diverse issues. So I think month to month would be fair for us to decide, especially in the summer when we don't even have any children in school. So we won't be able to see what they're made of, that.
Okay. Ms. Craybill, and I'm going to actually speak back to that. Every number I've seen is well over $250,000. Can you tell us about, I'd ask you to prepare that number. What if we went over a year for our current attorney?
And I guess some questions came from the board, and I responded on April 27th, where we had projected out for the remaining of the year based on current expenses to that point. And the number was $314,500 was our estimated expenses for this current year.
All right, so about $314,000, not $250,000.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Walker?
Does that include Mr. Sharpless as well?
It does not. That is just Tharrington and Smith.
Okay, and I don't know if we've covered this before, what it covered. It does not include the civil case, yes?
It does not.
Okay.
So again, I'm going to speak, go ahead, you speak.
I would like to echo a little bit. I think that a trial period, I don't think is a bad idea. However, I think I would like to see some stability in maybe a 6-month versus a month-to-month. I'm not going to come month-to-month to argue with this board back and forth of different things. I think we're going to get feedback, and I think the reality is we need to let time for decisions to be made and see the process of that. And so I would be open for talking about a 6-month cycle and then to reevaluate then. But that's my 2 cents.
Mr. Chair, does that mean Ms. Barham would like to amend the motion? Does that mean Ms. Barham wants to amend the motion, or is she suggesting an amendment?
I'm just offering it for discussion. Yeah, there's the, month to month, there's a few different things, and so I don't know where the board stands on a retainer or whatever, but for me, the month to month is just too quick.
Mr. McManus?
I like that. If Ms. Craybill will send hers, then I think 6 months is fair. And at least we all have agreed to overlap and try. So we're not.
Mr. Craybill, are you akin to changing or amending your, I'm sorry, go Mr. Weber?
And board members, from a purely procedural perspective, so there's a motion to enter into a contract with the Vogel Law Firm on a month-to-month basis that's been seconded. And then Ms. Barnhart has just made a motion to amend, essentially striking month-to-month and replacing it with a 6-month contract. Is there a second? I think at this point, Mr. Chair, it would be to ask for a second to that amendment.
Okay, do we have a second? Do we have a motion? I don't think we actually had a formal motion. Did you make that motion to amend?
Yes, I just don't know where personally my head is, the retainer or the hourly cost, but I think this, for me, the time constraint of month to month is too much back and forth, so I think a 6-month, for us to be all called to the table again to have an open discussion would be a good timeline. But I don't know if I'm comfortable with the retainer or month to month, which is better, so I'd love to hear discussion from the rest of the board on that.
Okay, Mr. McManus, you seconded that amendment. Okay. So at this point, we have-
Mr. Wildebohr, she didn't make a motion. She said she wanted discussion. So there is no motion for him to second.
Oh, then I misunderstood. Did you make that motion or did you not?
No,
I
I
misunderstood.
apologize, Mr. Chairman. I was just offering it for discussion
Okay.
rather than a month to month.
Okay.
I think that's just too quick.
Okay.
I think a 6-month, if we're looking at a timeline to reevaluate, I wanted to offer up that for discussion since we're
Okay. Well,
discussing.
so at this point, the motion in front of us is Ms. Craybill's motion. And again, I'll restate that real quickly and then we can have further discussion on that. And that motion is month to month and pay as you go. And Ms. Walker, go ahead.
Well, I would just say, thank you. I would just say, we can have the discussion once you make the motion in the second, because I think you would have had a second, or you do, with that amendment. I mean, that's the only way we're going to be able to discuss it, because right now, we're not talking about amounts, we're talking about time periods. I think it's appropriate to talk about that in this motion.
Well, are you making that motion then?
Well, it's not my motion to make. I think it's Ms. Barnhart's motion to make.
Well, if not, let's go ahead and vote on the original motion, which is made by Ms. Craybill, second by Ms. Walker, month to month, pay as you go. Unless there's further discussion, Ms. Carice, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Walker?
Sorry.
This is month to month, pay as you go.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. McManus?
Yes.
Ms. Mason?
No.
Ms. Bradford?
No.
Ms. Barnhart? Ms. Craybill?
Yes.
Mr. Wildebohr?
No. Defeated 4-3. So we are back now needing a motion to carry on our discussion.
Mr. Wilbur.
Ms. Bradford.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we enter into a year-long contract with the Vogel Law Firm on the retainer as discussed.
Okay, is there a second on that? Hearing none, we will carry on. I will make a motion that we enter into a 6-month contract with Vogel, with the Vogel Law Firm, with the retainer. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Barnhart. Okay, so let me put my name here. Yeah. Motion second.
Mr. Wildebohr, I'd like to.
I get to talk about it first, if I can.
I'm making a motion to on top of your motion.
Okay, to amend.
To amend, yes, please. We need to decide which retainer, and I would make a motion that we decide the lesser of the retainers, just to come to board meetings.
Okay, so,
12, it's 12,000, yes, per month,
okay.
whether
so-
we use them or not.
Okay, so the motion, the motion to amend at this point is to take the lesser of the two retainers, because I did not specify.
Actually, you know what, Mr. Wildebohr, I'm going to change that we still pay as you go.
Okay.
Because I want to only pay for what we need. Thank you, Liberty Mutual.
There's a little humor here at times. Okay, so there's a motion to, yes, sir.
We're not getting anywhere.
We are.
We're regressing. We take a little break, and I think, because I'm not sure about, everyone understands all the options. But we're wiffle balling here. That's the description I got.
Okay.
And we've got, come on, folks, we're playing a game. I'm tired of the games. We're not going to break this 4-3 vote. So we need to deal with it and move on. What I say is we failed to ever agree or try or to share or compromise. So I disagree with Vogel, but that vote's not going to change. I don't think there's a person here that believes it will. And so I think 6 months is fair. I thought that was very fair. I thought that was a compromise, much as could be. And so I hope you rescind yours, that we can vote on 6 months. And if things good,
Mr. Chair.
I think they can be, then that won't be a problem at the end of 6 months. But we're going to have expenses, we've got overlap, we've got consultation. We don't even know what we don't have once, with all the stuff
Mr.
going
Chair.
on. Things that y'all got that we don't.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Actually, that provides some clarity. So not about how many months, whatever, more on the financial side. So billable hours is what we would prefer. We think with all boards that I've worked with has been billable. Retainer does something different. So for instance, if it's 22, 30, whatever it is, our bill fluctuates. And so sometimes it can get as low as 17,000 a month. And it's been as high as 30,000 a month. And it depends, I'll be honest, with special ed. How long that consulting has to take place. So it may be one day it's an additional 6, or a month it could be 15 hours. But then it'll go, summertime it has been as low as, like I said, 17. So if it's 17,000 and let's say you're saying we'll retain you for 22, you're still responsible for paying 22 and the services weren't provided. So billable hours, and we get a printout, and so we do, if there's something that we feel that's disputable, then we contact the firm and say, you have X, and actually when that itemized bill or invoice comes in, I send it to the entire senior staff and they have to check it because it's itemized for us. So just for us, I believe a better financial decision would be for billable services. And I mean, you do the exact same thing. I just don't want the district to pay for, it could be $5,000 that you're not using and you're still paying plus $5,000 for it. And our hope is to get it back to 17. And so it's consistent, but it has literally been, and this has just been a high time. And I'm not going to mention all the legal services that are going on, but it's just been a high time, and that's why it's higher. But it has been on the lower side of 17 and 20, and that's where it had been for some time. And then it has shot up in the last couple of, I'm sorry, I'm dealing with some allergy issues right now.
So basically, the nomenclature of bill as you go or pay as you go and billable services are the same. Okay, same. So no, you can't make a motion. So right now we have an amendment. I don't know. Did you second that?
It's been so long since we've had it.
I'm trying to keep
I
track of
know.
this. I do, we had an amended motion, and that is to go for 6 months and go to billable, I'm going to use that.
Pay-as-you-go,
Yeah,
yes.
pay-as-you-go billable services. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Okay, now we have a second. Second. All right, we've had discussion.
We haven't, I'm not on that, we haven't. Have we had discussion on that? Because it was the
Well,
first time
I
it's
think
been
We
seconded.
did, Doctor, and I was just going to reiterate the same things that he did, and was actually going to ask if we were at an impasse to list all of our options so that we aren't ping-ponging with that, because our options are, when do we want Vogel to start, what type of contract we want for billing, and we can do the pay-as-you-go, we can do the retainer, the minimal with board meetings only, we can do the retainer for the comprehensive services, so, and then the length of the contract we talked about, and then the terms of our contract. So that's what I just thought we would have a list to kind of choose from, but now that we've said those out loud and we're considering them, but I really think that we should go with pay-as-you-go, so that we, at least in the 6-month trial period.
Okay, Ms. Bradford?
I originally brought up the retainer because I felt like we had ballooned up in the last few months with so many requests of the legal services of Therington. And I thought that having a retainer would allow us to have free access to an attorney with all the many, many questions that we all have. With a new attorney, I would thinking that we might even have extra questions. So I'm not opposed to the hourly, but one of the reasons why I found the qualifications on paper and in person, not in advance, but after the presentation, was that these are litigators. They are, from their reputation, from their own words, they're litigators. We need litigators, and I am in no way going to take them to where they're just board advisors. We're hiring them to be litigators to defend us against lawsuits, and that's not a negotiable item for me.
Ms. I gotta get Ms. Walker's new.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
maybe I should.
Thank you, Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to rehash it. I've said my piece, and I mean it. I mean what I said, and I'm not going to go back into that. But the subject at hand here is, are we going to be fiscally responsible? We do have budget to consider, which doesn't reset until July 1st. And we have to consider the best cost-saving options. And we've already considered consulting with other attorneys for other matters. So we have to keep that in mind also. I do appreciate, and I do disagree with Mr. McManus that we are not coming to something. I think we are. We may never agree on our decision with the firm, but we are hopefully agreeing on some terms. And I do appreciate the 6 months and pay-as-you-go model here in this situation for us.
Yes, ma'am, Ms.
Yeah, I just wanted to point us to page 12 of the Vogel contract, page 11 and 12, because not contract, their proposal, because it does lay out what they're considering, and they are actually considering hourly billing for litigation and threatened litigation. We will zealously litigate on behalf of the school district and school board, and government investigations and threatened government investigations, which would include with the North Carolina Department of Instruction and the Office of Civil Rights. So those things they're already saying they're going to be billing us hourly for, versus the day-to-day school matters where they list all of the things. So we're going to get, if we do a retainer, we're still going to get some hourly billing from them.
All right, we have in front of us an amendment from Ms. Craybill, seconded by Ms. Walker, to change from my motion of retainer to, and I'm going to use Dr. Faust's words, billable services. Could you please call the roll on that?
Ms. Crable?
Yes.
Ms. Barnhart?
Yes.
Ms. Bradford?
No.
Ms. Mason?
Yes.
Mr. McManus?
Yes.
Ms. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Wildebohr?
Yes. Passes 6-1. Go back to the original motion made by myself, seconded by Ms. Barnhart, that we enter into a 6-month contract with the Vogel Law Firm using billable services. Please call the roll.
But, could you restate that? Because I think we already voted on,
But we didn't vote on the length of the 6 month, did we? I don't believe we did.
that was in the last one.
We voted on your amendment,
The
which was to
board,
change.
the board just voted on Ms. Crable's amendment, so now the board is voting on the original motion as amended.
Yes,
Okay,
that's
so my
amended.
amendment was just to make pay-as-you-go versus
Right.
retainer. Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
sorry.
So now we're voting on the 6 month pay-as-you-go amend, get that off there? 6 month contract with Vogel Law Firm with using billable services. If you would please call the roll.
Ms. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. McManus?
Yes.
Ms. Mason?
Yes.
Ms. Bradford?
No.
Ms. Barnhart?
Yes.
Ms. Crable?
Yes.
Mr. Wildebohr?
Yes. Again, passes 6-1. That ends our discussion of legal services. So we will move now to our superintendent's evaluation tool.
I might have to go.
Mr. Weber, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And it might help, I'm trying to figure out how to do this with the technology to share my screen so I can advance through. Just give me 1 second to pull it up.
No,
Can you see that?
I brought my paper somewhere. I thought I brought it.
Can you see these slides?
Oh, we have them on our screens.
There it is.
Okay, perfect. I shared my screen so that I can advance through from my location, and please let me know if for some reason it's not matching up on your end. Right, so thank you, board members. Good afternoon. This is training on the State Board of Education Superintendent Evaluation Instrument. Just to provide some clarity, this is just general training on the instrument itself. So this is not intended in any way to be specific to Dr. Faust. This is training on how to complete the evaluation. So I just want to start with a quick overview of the goals of this presentation. I'll provide you with an overview of statutory policy and other authority for evaluating your superintendent. I'll also talk a little bit about the purpose of superintendent evaluation, review the steps in the superintendent evaluation process. My main goal is to dive into step 4 of that process, which is the most time intensive for you as individuals. And that's the step where you conduct and determine your own individual board member ratings as well as consensus board ratings. So very quickly here, there are several sources of authority for boards of ed to evaluate their superintendents. Under GS 115C 333, boards must evaluate the superintendent each year if 3 or more schools have been designated as low performing during that year. Boards also have general responsibility for hiring and assigning duties to and removing their superintendents if necessary. Under state board policy, superintendents may be evaluated annually using the North Carolina superintendent evaluation process. And there's also a state board of education policy that speaks to professional standards for superintendents. One other source of authority, typically in a standard superintendent contract, there's a provision that speaks to an annual evaluation. Sometimes that provision will include a particular date by which the evaluation should be completed. Other times it does not. That just depends on the specific contract. The board also has policies for superintendent evaluation. Policy 7805 requires an annual evaluation. That policy states that the board may use the process and guidelines established by the state board, including the rubric for evaluating North Carolina superintendents or other processes. It's my understanding that in New Hanover County Schools, you use the State Board of Education evaluation tool. Your local board policy also includes performance standards and an overview of the evaluation process, and it pretty much tracks the State Board of Education standards and process. The purpose of the superintendent evaluation, and this quote comes straight from your own policy 7805, It's primarily intended to assist the superintendent in improving his or her effectiveness. So the board's overarching goal and responsibility is to improve, your school system. And one way to do that, as stated in your policies, is to assist the superintendent through the evaluation process. Under the NCDPI or State Board of Ed superintendent evaluation process, there are certain statements in there that speak to the intended purpose. Part of it, of course, is to assess your superintendent's performance, specifically in relation to research-based strategies that have proven to be effective. The other purpose, as stated in the State Board of Ed's evaluation tool, is to serve as a guide for superintendents to reflect on and improve their effectiveness. And then the final purpose is to serve as a basis for self-assessment, goal setting, professional development, again, all focused on improving performance. Just a couple of guiding principles as you go through this process. It's important to focus on performance and on evidence, and not to focus so much on personalities, and really to focus first and foremost on the board's mission and strategic plan goals, because the goal, of course, is to move your district forward and to make progress and achieve your mission. And again, one way of doing that is by not just assessing, but also supporting the superintendent through the annual evaluation. And then the last guiding principle I like to include is, this is a very superintendent-driven process. The first 3 steps in the evaluation process, which we'll get to later, the superintendent takes the lead. And that's a direct quote from the state evaluation instrument itself. You already have this link, but I wanted to share it again. The State Board of Ed superintendent evaluation documents, they're available online. That includes training materials, there's a manual, there are PDF versions of the evaluation forms, the summary rating sheet, and also forms for the superintendent's goal. So there are 5 steps in the superintendent evaluation process. The first is the superintendent's self-assessment. The second is the meeting between the superintendent and the school board. The third is the consolidated performance assessment. Fourth, the district school board rating of the superintendent. And fifth, the final evaluation and goal setting meeting. And you'll see some of these images that I have on the screen come from the evaluation manual itself, which is available online. The manual and state board policy also establish the responsibilities of the superintendent and the board as it relates to the evaluation. For board members, those responsibilities include participating in training, which you're doing now, ensuring that the process is conducted as stated in the evaluation manual, identifying the superintendent's strengths and areas for improvement, ensuring that the summary evaluation is accurate and reflects performance, and also participating in discussions and guiding the superintendent on setting goals. The superintendent's responsibilities include understanding the process, preparing for and participating in the various steps, including step 2, and the heavy lifting for your superintendent is to gather data, documents, and evidence to support performance, as well as developing and implementing strategies to improve and finalizing goals. A little bit more about the 5-step process. So the first step, again, the superintendent conducts a self-assessment using the evaluation rubric. The second step is to have a meeting between your superintendent and board to establish the process, talk about the evaluation scope, timeline, goals for the evaluation, what evidence will be collected, and consequences and benefits of performance. The superintendent also shares their self-assessment rubric at step 2 and proposed areas to address. In step 3, the superintendent provides a summary of evidence and documentation that's needed to judge performance throughout the year. And then today, again, we'll focus mostly on step 4. This is where board members individually rate the superintendent using the rubric for evaluating North Carolina superintendents. And as part of that, the board also meets as a group to discuss their individual ratings and agree on a single rating for each element and standard. And under the manual, the board is to make every effort to reach consensus on the ratings. And the fifth and final step in the process is for the board and superintendent to meet and discuss the self-assessment, the board's evaluation of the superintendent, and to agree upon performance goals and recommendations for the upcoming school year. The rubric, which I'll show examples of in a couple of slides, has 7 performance standards, each of which includes 1 or more elements, and the superintendent's performance on each standard and each element is judged by ratings. The standards are available online at the website link here. This is just the DPI site. And the 7 standards are strategic leadership, instructional leadership, cultural leadership, human resources leadership, managerial leadership, external development leadership, and micro-political leadership. Each of the standards is broken out into the standard itself, which is the higher level broad category of knowledge and skills. Each standard includes a summary that more fully describes the content and the rationale. Each standard also includes practices, which are statements of what one would see in an effective executive who is performing the skills seen in that standard. Also includes suggested artifacts, which are examples of evidence of the quality of the executive's work. And finally, each standard also includes basic competencies, which, as you'll see in the manual, those are located actually after the 7 standards, which are intended to be competencies that are inherent in the practices of critical leadership. This is probably hard to see, but it's just a screenshot of the standards. Again, this is all available in the DPI manual that I believe you have copies of, and that's available online. So you can see how they're laid out with the standard itself, the summary, practices, and specific examples of artifacts. The performance ratings, there are 5 different rating options: not demonstrated, developing, proficient, accomplished, and distinguished. Not demonstrated means that the superintendent did not demonstrate competence on or adequate growth toward achieving standards of performance. Now, if you as an individual board member select not demonstrated, then you have to include comments about why it was used. And these are all quotes from the evaluation instrument itself. A little more detail. Superintendent sometimes might not demonstrate evidence of proficiency. That's the situation where you select not demonstrated. It can also be used to document evidence that a superintendent is performing at a level below expectations or below standard. And again, if that column is selected, then there must be comments made as to why it was selected. The developing rating, superintendent demonstrated adequate growth toward achieving standards during the period of performance, but did not demonstrate competence on standards of performance. The developing superintendent, they might exemplify skills expected of a superintendent who's new, or an experienced superintendent who is working in a new school, or who needs a new skill to meet the standard. A proficient superintendent is one who has demonstrated basic competence on standards of performance. A proficient superintendent must show the skills and knowledge described under the developing column, as well as all of those under proficient. And I'll show you a visual of what that means in a couple slides. The accomplished superintendent is one that has exceeded basic competence on standards of performance most of the time. And the distinguished superintendent is a superintendent who consistently and significantly exceeded basic competence on standards of performance. And a distinguished superintendent would exhibit all of the skills and knowledge described for that element across the entire row in the rubric. So that's a lot of words. Here's what it actually looks like. In the rubric itself, you'll see they're set up with the standards at the top, with the specific element that the superintendent is being rated on right underneath that in blue. And then the ratings, you can see they go from developing, proficient, accomplished to distinguished. Not demonstrated is obviously not the highest rating. It's just set aside because comments are required. And then each of the boxes includes descriptors for to help with the rating process. Each of these also includes a space for comments, so where you can write in as individuals written comments, as well as suggested data and documents to review as part of your determination for the overall rating. So how to score the rubric? Well, you mark the box beside each element in evidence, and you start with the left column. If the superintendent does not demonstrate the practice, you leave the box blank, and only mark not demonstrated if you cannot check any of the boxes in any of the 4 columns. And the scores are cumulative. So to be rated proficient, the superintendent must exhibit all of the practices under developing and all of the practices under proficient. To be rated distinguished, the superintendent must exhibit all of the practices under developing, proficient, accomplished, and distinguished. And I'll show you an example of that next. So this is a figure from the manual, just showing again that you start with developing at the top, move down through each of the 3 practices, then move over to proficient, down through the practices under proficient, to accomplished, to distinguished. And that's just showing the order in which to go when you're scoring this particular standard or any of the others. This is an example of a sample completed rubric. Again, this is all in the state's materials, where you can see that, on this sample, all of the boxes under developing have been checked, all but 1 under proficient, all but 1 under accomplished, and all but 1 under distinguished. And then this, again, is just another page of examples for Standard 1, where you can see the boxes have been checked. Now, after doing your individual ratings, as individuals, again, you'll complete a summary evaluation worksheet. And on your individual worksheets, the overall rating for each standard is the middle rating of the element ratings within that standard. This is an example of the evaluation worksheet. You can see each of the standards at the bottom. And this is an example of a completed summary evaluation worksheet. I should very quickly go back here just to point out again that the scoring is cumulative, and in order to be rated at a certain level, all of the boxes in the preceding level and the level itself must be checked. So on this particular example, this superintendent would be rated as proficient on Standard 1, a strategic plan, or developing, I'm sorry, because only all of the boxes under developing have been checked. And then for these examples, the superintendent would be rated as accomplished. You can see all of the boxes under developing have been checked. All of the boxes under proficient have been checked. All of the boxes under accomplished have been checked, but only 1 of the boxes under distinguished has been checked. So again, this superintendent on this particular item would be rated accomplished. And this last example here, the superintendent under distributive leadership would be rated as proficient. All of the boxes under developing have been checked, all the boxes under proficient, but only 2 out of the 3 under accomplished. So after you as individuals complete your rating forms, the board or a designated individual, I think historically that's been your board attorney, will collect and tally the ratings of each board member. And then the board as a group meets to determine the final ratings for each standard. And the final rating for each standard is the median of the individual board member scores. And the final overall rating is the median of the combined scores on each standard. And that's determined by arranging the median scores from lowest to highest and finding the score in the middle. And again, under the DPI evaluation instrument, the board is encouraged to make every effort to achieve consensus on the superintendent ratings, although that might not be possible in all situations. And this is just an example of the combined ratings form. And this is where an individual, again, in the past, it's been your board attorney, would tally all the scores and determine the median. This is an example with it completed. This is an example with a 7-member board. So you can see on standard 1, the superintendent received 1 board member saying not demonstrated, 4 proficient, 2 accomplished. So the median is proficient. You can see how that goes for each standard. And then the overall score for this superintendent would be proficient. And again, this is heavily driven by and assisted by typically your board attorney. So after individual board members have completed their evaluations and the board has met to determine its combined rating form, the board will meet and have a final evaluation. This is step 5 in the process, and a goal-setting meeting. This is where the superintendent and the board meet together to talk about the superintendent's progress towards achieving goals for the year, the levels of performance. They'll also talk about the superintendent's self-assessment, the consolidated assessment, the summary evaluation. If for some reason at that point there's additional data or documents that need to be brought, then the board and the superintendent agree on what that information is and a timeline for providing it to the board. And at this meeting, the superintendent and the board also agree upon performance goals for the next school year. This is just an example of goals. This is just, again, a sample of what it would look like. That's blank, and this is completed. Do you have any questions?
Remember, do we have any questions? No? Dr. Pass, would you remind us of the timeline on this?
Sure. So at our next closed session agenda review, we will self-assessment and you'll get your evaluation documents that you can. Your self-assessment, but your assessment.
Okay.
And when will they be due?
Jason, couldn't think of his name. That'll be Jason to tell us when they're due.
When they being the individual board member.
Yeah. So after
ratings.
After I do self-assessment presentation, the question was, when will the evaluation tool be due? The timeline, or will you send a timeline to the board so we can update them on the dates?
Right, and that's all part of this next step in the process. So that would be step 2.
Other questions or discussions? No, thank you very much, Mr. Weber. Appreciate that. Looking at our agenda, I believe we are at the end of our agenda. So we have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. That would be Ms. Barnhart first, Ms. Bradford second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes 7-0. Board members, thank you for your time.
6-1. 6-0.
Oh, 6-0. I'm sorry, 6-0. Passes 6-0. Corrected. Thank you for your hard work today.